All right, I wanted to go over a little bit here about what we can learn from Mr. Johnny Depp and Elon Musk's relationship with Amber Heard. Now, I think I relate more to what Johnny was going through there because Johnny Depp, is a very attractive fellow, and he probably had his choice of any woman he could have wanted. But yet, out of all the women he could have chosen, he chose Amber Heard. Why would he do that? Now, I think there's a couple different factors here with why he did it, and I think it's very similar to why Elon Musk did it too. But if I had to guess, Johnny Depp probably has some trauma in his past. He probably also has some cluster B traits as well. And what happened was normal, healthy women probably bored him, is probably what happened. Now, when you can get any woman, I can see how that could happen, right? But when a cluster B woman comes along, a BPD woman like Amber Heard, and she gives you the love bombing, she idealizes you, pedestalizes you, it can make a guy who's not ready for it feel like $1,000,000 because that cluster B stuff, man, it's powerful, let me tell you. And Johnny Depp, he's probably bored with all the regular women, and he needed those emotional spikes. He needed those ups and downs and those attraction triggers. And Amber Heard came along and she hit all of those spots, and the trauma bond was probably instant. And he's probably thinking to himself, wow, I haven't felt like this for a while. She's getting me in the way no other woman's really gotten me for a long time. But in reality, it was probably very similar. I bet you one of Johnny's parents probably had an issue of sorts. And Johnny Depp, moody, struggles with addiction. So this left him vulnerable. Now, if I were to coach Johnny Depp, what I would say to him is, listen, man, you got to practice radical self-respect in these situations. And yes, a woman like that, when you have that hole, when you have that vulnerability to a cluster B woman's trauma bonding, yes, you will absolutely feel it, and it'll be night and day too. It's not even going to be like hit or miss. It's like, no, like when that cluster B woman comes along and you've got that spot that she's just waiting to fill, boom, it hits you, and it just feels completely different. And I can relate to this in my own life. I've talked about this before, but I'm not attracted to the old cluster B women I used to be. But I've noticed this. There's different versions of cluster B women, right? There's the kind that's unaware, the kind that's not really on top of their game. But then there's other cluster B women that are actually pretty smart, and they are pretty successful, and they even may have some self-awareness. Those are the trickier variety. And I bet you Amber Heard, she might have fell a little bit into that variety, very successful. Now, granted, also probably narcissistic. Look at all of her fame and her looks. She probably used them to her advantage for a long time. I'm not really sure of her intelligence, so I'm not going to comment on that part. But, it probably, Johnny was probably feeling a little bit bored, and she came along and brightened up his life. And what it should have been for Johnny Depp was, yes, you can have fun with Amber Heard. You can hang out with her, have fun, but don't get serious about Amber Heard. Don't do that. Don't dive headfirst in, because look what happened. There's plenty of opportunities in there where Johnny, he disrespected himself. And the things that she was doing, filming him while he was nodding off with ice cream all over him, putting him in all of these terrible positions, a man who practices radical self-respect, they're not going to do that to themselves. They're not going to tolerate that. But his problem was also he had an addiction problem to boot. So not only was he addicted to drugs and alcohol, he's also probably addicted to the feeling of love. And he had that hole, the hole in his soul, man. And it left him vulnerable to the likes of an Amber Heard. And granted, it should have just been fun. And then he should have moved on his way. But instead, he probably has some soulmate myths floating around his head. And he thought, oh, this is the one, because we all know what happens when a cluster B woman, when you're not healed as a man, when you're not aware of what's going on, a cluster B woman in her love bombing phase will feel very much like a soulmate if you believe in those things. If you believe in a soulmate, that love bombing will feel like this person is meant to be in your life. That mirroring of all of your likes and dislikes. And granted, we see what that situation turned into now. We see how it ended with Johnny and Amber's court case there. But in the beginning, guess what? They probably had a blast. They probably had a hell of a time. And it was probably some of the best times of Johnny's life in the beginning. Amber probably not as much. She was a little more in control of the situation. It seems like she was the more manipulative person, and she knew what she was doing. She was more aware of the social dynamics because Johnny Depp was a little naive. But granted, he's probably having a blast there for a while, and he's probably had some times with her he'll never forget. But then, what happens when we ignore red flags? And I'm not sure what red flags were present first. I'm thinking their relationship, Elon's relationship with Amber was first. So maybe he should have taken note of kind of how that went down. But there was stuff going on, and I'm sure there were certain things that presented themselves where if we're paying attention and we're looking for what kind of person someone really is outside of how they make us feel, we got to keep our feet on the ground. And that's the thing, though, when a person is love bombing us and we're vulnerable to it, our feet can leave the ground and we're no longer aware and we're no longer paying attention to what's going on. And then all sorts of terrible things could happen because we got to be aware just because we feel a certain way about somebody doesn't mean they're going to be good for us. Doesn't mean they're going to be someone that's supposed to be in our lives. That's why feelings can be tricky, right? Now, not to say feelings are always wrong, but I've noticed in my own life in particular, some of the people I've felt the strongest about, it certainly didn't mean they were good people for me at the time. It meant that our traumas spliced. It meant that I was vulnerable for a trauma bond, and so were they. And so it felt like it was supposed to be something, but it really wasn't. It was really just that feelings trap. So I always tell other men, pay attention to how they actually are. Like, do you have rules for yourself? Do you have boundaries? Do you have things you look for, qualities of a woman you look for? And is she meeting those qualities? Is she meeting those requirements? Because if she's not, and she's just making you feel a certain way, that's something to watch out for. And I totally get it, because that is exactly what can happen with a cluster B woman, especially when they're attractive. They can give you those feelings so that you want to ignore the rest of the red flags that come along. But what happened with Johnny Depp and Amber is a great case study for what happens when we ignore red flags as a man. When you just chase good feelings, because I'm sure Amber made Johnny feel great in the beginning. Like I said, that part gets lost, but it's certainly true, no doubt. Those things don't just go straight to crap, right? They were fun first. They were fun first. They probably felt magical to him at first. But it was a mirage, because a love bombing from a woman, it's just a mirage. It's future faking. It's all sorts of things that she'll tell you anything that you want to hear, but it's a trap. And what we saw is what happens when you ignore those things, when you ignore the red flags, when you ignore certainly the symptoms that she must have been displaying, because that mask, that narcissistic cluster B mask, it can only stay up for so long before it falls. And then when it falls, it falls. And we saw the mask fall off in that trial. And that was a dirty picture, wasn't it? But I think that people forget it wasn't always that way. They were probably having a grand old time in the beginning. They were having a blast. But we only see the ending now, so it seems obvious. But it's not so obvious when the person's giving you great feelings. And this goes for men and women both. This is not just men I'm talking to here. I'm talking to both. Now with Elon, I have my thoughts on Elon. I'm no psychologist, but he might be on the spectrum a little bit. He's a little socially awkward, but he's powerful and he's wealthy. And I'm pretty sure Amber Heard just wrapped him around her finger, and she no doubt was in control of that relationship. Now, I'm not really familiar with how that one ended, But again, for Elon, it was probably something similar, where she gave him those great feelings, an attractive woman giving you all this love and affection and admiration. And yeah, you're Elon Musk. There's a lot of things to idealize about you, right? You're powerful, you're wealthy, you have all this influence on Twitter. Your tweets make Bitcoin pump. Your tweets make Dogecoin go up. So there's all sorts of fodder that Amber had to use as a love bombing tool. Same with Johnny Depp. She probably saying, "Oh, Johnny, I grew up watching your movies, Johnny. I loved Edward Scissorhands. I loved this. I loved Blow. I love this." And Johnny Depp probably loved to hear it. And he probably heard that 1,000 times from other women. But it probably meant something different to him when Amber said it, because it touched him, because she had that cluster B twang. Boom. But with Elon, I don't think he's even as aware with women as Johnny Depp was. So Amber was probably able to really manipulate him and wrap him around her fingers. And it probably got too easy for her, and she probably got bored. And what did she do? Love bomb, devalue, discard. Same thing that's happened with Johnny Depp. Love bomb, devalue, discard. And like I said, I talked previously about a meme I heard about the Amber Heard BPD diagnosis that, oh no, there's going to be a whole new level of stigma about BPD because of this thing. It's like, actually, no. Sometimes that's exactly what happens with someone who has BPD. It's not stigma. It's just making people more aware. And if a BPD person doesn't get help, that is absolutely how they can be. That's absolutely what can happen. Those kinds of things you saw that Amber did with Johnny. And again here, what do we learn about this? We learn that feelings are not always a good indicator of how things are going. We have to take a look at someone's actions, and we got to have values and principles to look at and say, okay, is this person kind of meeting our criteria here? What kind of person are they outside of the attraction and sex that's going on? Because that's another thing the cluster B woman will absolutely use. She'll use your looks, and she'll use sex to make you think of nothing else, to make you ignore all of the other possible red flags that are right around the corner. And she's good at it. And like I've said before, cluster B women, they are really good at making a man feel like $1,000,000. That love bombing phase can feel great if you are susceptible to it. But nowadays, like, it would take a very special cluster B woman, I think, to ever do that to me again. Now, I have felt it before since I've become aware. I've become aware, but I just haven't gotten sucked in by it. Because that's the thing you can't let happen as a man. You can't get sucked in like Johnny Depp did. You can't get sucked in the way Elon did. We got to be stronger than that. We got to be aware that, hey, yes, this person might make me feel good, but is she really the kind of person to marry and to commit to? I don't think so. But like I said, Elon and Johnny, they both had their own issues. So I get what happened to them, but at the end of the day, it's still their own fault. Also, everything that happened, especially as a man. As a man, you got to know better. And you got to be able to have some discernment and a vetting process where you don't marry someone, especially if they're going to be a cluster B person that is not working on it. You just don't do that. That is asking for a disaster. But again, Johnny has some blue pill idealizations, no doubt. He has the soulmate myth floating around his head, and he's got that trauma, and their trauma's probably spliced, and they made everything 1,000 times harder for him to see through. But that's on him, though, too. There's all these things that happened where if he had boundaries and if he had some radical self-respect, he wouldn't have wound up in those scenarios. And again, it wasn't nearly as bad for Elon, but I'm sure there was some crap we don't know about, too, that happened in there. But for both of them, I would say, radical self-respect above all else. Keep your feet on the ground. Look for red flags. Look for cluster B warning signs. What are cluster B warning signs as a review? The love bombing. Mirroring all of your likes and dislikes. How do they handle being told no? Do they get very angry if they're told no? How do they handle being told a boundary? Do they gaslight? Do they flip the script back on you? Do they tell you you're crazy for having a boundary? Or how do they communicate their own boundaries? These are just some of the simple tests to look for. Remember, cluster B folks, very sensitive to criticism. The BPD variety, they will split, right? They'll also have a variety of self-harm tactics. They might have SUI idealizations. Their sense of self will not be fully transformed, not be fully developed. Johnny Depp has a little bit of that too. And I think that's partly the reason why he's been such a good actor as well. He's played so many different roles because he kind of molds and his identity is fluid. It's fluid. And it can go from a Captain Jack Sparrow to a Edward Scissorhands to the guy from Blow to the book collector in that one Devil movie. But anyway, those are the things to watch out for. Those are the cluster B warning signs. And with a narcissistic variety, they want power, status, prestige. They have an excessive need for admiration. Again, they are also very sensitive to criticism. They'll gaslight. They live in a fantasy world, right? And they only want people around them that affirm them. They don't want to be called out on anything. They don't want to have anyone tell them no. They don't want any boundaries. And they'll often they're picking at all the flaws of others. Because one thing narcissists are pretty good at, they are excellent at noticing flaws and then picking at them and then amplifying them, in particular in front of others as well. And they'll probably smear around others. They'll smear people to family, to friends. They'll have a barrage of flying monkeys. And especially a hot woman that's cluster B, she can have a whole garage of flying monkeys, and she can have a whole garage of supply too, right? And men do this too, of course, but that's how this goes. But these are the things to watch out for. And for a woman like that, it's probably best to stay away. But if you're going to be in there, just have fun and keep it moving with someone like that. In this day and age, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that, but you don't marry a person like that, especially if they are not working on it in any way. They're asking for trouble. And both Elon and Johnny, they're at the pinnacles of their fields respectively. But in regards to women, I think they have a lot to learn. And I would love to be able to help two gentlemen like that, because there's no reason why those two shouldn't be able to have a good relationship if they so desired. But especially with Johnny, radical self-respect first. I don't know how he's dealing with his addictions right now, but that, I think, played a part in this as well, because when substances and booze are involved, our self-awareness goes down. We're not able to see things clearly. And as we saw, Amber certainly took advantage of that. And as a man, hey, when you're as wealthy as he is, and you don't have to work, you're doing things only because you want to, yeah, it can be tempting to fall into that. But that's where you need to have a real discipline and focus on your bigger picture. And I'm sure with him, and I struggle with this part too, but going off into fantasy land, it can certainly be tempting. But it's important to keep myself grounded and keep myself pushing towards my goals. And yeah, I'll reward myself with a little fantasy time every once in a while. But I've learned moderation. Right? You gotta only do those things sometimes. And it certainly can't be on any really consistent basis. I imagine Johnny is drinking, drugging every day. And you can't be at your best when you're doing that. So like I said, we've learned a lot here from Johnny and Elon. But most importantly, I think we've learned what to watch out for in terms of a cluster B woman. What to know. What are the red flags to keep an eye out for? That's what you got to look at. And just because you feel something doesn't mean it's good. Because I think a lot of people, if they've had that kind of upbringing with a narcissistic or borderline parent, you are primed to be attracted to that kind of person. When your upbringing was chaotic, when your upbringing was maybe even slightly abusive, you are primed to be attracted to that kind of person as an adult. And we have to have that awareness, and we have to know that. And that's how I think our feelings can betray us. And like I said, I'm not sure if we can actually move through that part completely. Like we might be aware of it. We might know, okay, I know I can't be attracted to this. I shouldn't be, but maybe they feel it anyway. I'm not sure. Again, this is a psychological question I've been pondering over for a while. I've been able personally to push through it with most of the cluster B women I've come across. But every now and again, there is one that I notice and I'm like, yo, you know what? I know what they are, but I still feel it because they're slick, they're smart, and they're more self aware. And they're not like the garden variety. They come off as a little better. But that's a story for another day. So that's my video here tonight. Comment below what you think about the video. Did you like it, not like it? Any other comments you want to make about Johnny or Elon or even Amber and her diagnosis? Or maybe even Elon's or Johnny's, what their possible diagnoses could be. It'd be interesting. But that's all. Have a great rest of your day.